Hi everyone. In our previous class, we were talking about Judge Price and his movement against the West Indian Federation. One of the things that is very important to note about it was that Judge Price basically began to frame ideas of nationalism and began to frame ideas of us against them in relation to the British. And his anti-British rhetoric is that basically began to promote a nationalist idea or a nationalist sentiment throughout the colony. So today we're going to be looking at the colonial counter offense. We partially covered some of it in our previous class, but we need to understand what strategies or methods the colonial government did to try to break up the nationalist movement, or at least the creation of the People's United Party, and create some sort of division amongst the people. One of the strategies that the British always use is divide and conquer, and that was one of the things that they wanted to do. So today we're going to be looking at two things. We're going to describe the counterattacks by the colonial authorities on the nationalist movement, and we're going to identify briefly some of the victories of the PUP. One of the things that the nationalist movement, along with the General Workers Union, did was actually to gain universal adult suffrage, which is the right to vote for everybody over 18. And that became a very important moment in history for Belize, because before this it was dominated by the aristocracy, then it was dominated by the elites, then it was dominated by the male elites. It's very important to note about that. And now it's becoming a lot more democratic, a lot more open, where people are going to vote for who they want as their leaders. um, so let's take a look at this. When the nationalist movement was already ongoing within British Honduras, the government actually sent emissaries to come and evaluate the situation, the government of England, that is. And they began to note in their report that most of the colonial or the anti-colonial sentiments were based in Belize City, because you're talking about an educated class of people, middle class people, that wanted to have some sort of independence from England. And one of the things that they were highlighting, and they were trying to identify the weaknesses of the nationalist movement, is the fact that all of the activities were based in Belize City, and that out district activity was very limited. So they were trying to say, look, yeah, people want independence, or people have an anti-British sentiment, but it's only in the city. All the other areas don't do that. Then lastly, one of the things that they were doing is that they wanted to promote or propose or push for a nominated town board and a nominated village councils, part nominated. What this means, it means that the colonial government would have the authority to nominate people to become part of these boards without an election. So it's very important to note that how they were trying to get their hands into all of these organizations, so that they would have their people in there to ensure that they're following some sort of restrictions that the British government is imposing. Um, the colonial government as well decided to create the national party, and this national party, as much as it may seem like, a Belize national party, it was not. It was more like a British national party, or British dominated in terms of ideology in British Honduras. um, and the colonial government began to persecute the leaders and imprison the PUP leaders, and they in a way began to find a way of dividing people. And to an extent, they were already framing the minds of neo-colonial activity, whereby they were using the Creole middle class as well as one of their biggest fronts to create a two-party system, one that was fully going for independence, and the other one that was a lot more aligned to British policies. Um, by 1952, things were getting really rough in British Honduras. The colonial government froze the wages, the prices of food were high, and you could imagine this just infuriated the working class. But it also provided some sort of gasoline for people to come out and strike, for the GW, the General Workers Union, and the People's United Party to gain some sort of backing, and in a way to reignite that nationalist idea. By 1952, there were strikes for weeks, and the colonial government was being attacked. The colonial government was becoming unpopular, and the nationalist sentiments, or the ideas of creating a free nation, a Belize nation per se, free a Belize, was coming stronger. Eventually, By 1954, 2 years after the strikes, the PUP, along with the General Workers Union and other organizations, were able to gain universal adult suffrage. Now, universal adult suffrage in 1954 meant that all persons over 18, male or female, had the right to vote. Right? Adults. It is something that today we seem to take for granted, but this right was not always there. It was achieved way up to 1954. Again, along with the ideas of the nationalist sentiments. The PUP won that election in 1954 as well, and in the 1950s, sorry. And as you can see, the PUP became very popular at this point because they're teaching or fighting for the people, and to an extent, the mantra of power to the people was now vibrant in the nationalist movement, was now vibrant in the People's United Party. However, the joy of being together was short-lived as well, because by 1957, George Price becomes the leader of the People's United Party. Some of the PUP members were opted and became ministers in government, but there were people that were not happy with how George Price and other members of the People's United Party were managing the situation. For example, Lee Richardson and Philip Goulson eventually decided to split from the People's United Party and create the the Honduras Independence Party, which eventually transformed into what today is the United Democratic Party. So for today, this is what I wanted to do for this week. Sorry, I wanted to create a diary entry. So it's like you're writing to a diary, their diary, and then it's a one paragraph project from the perspective of the nationalist movement, in which you will write the British counter-offense against the nationalist movement that you had. Date it as if it were the 1960s. Again, there are three major things that I wanted to talk about. Describe the attack, highlight the formation of the British supported party, and describe the victories of the PUP very briefly. Thank you. Again, any questions? If you have any questions, I am available. Please do not hesitate to send in your comments and questions.